Paul is one of the biggest examples of the white savior trope that I've seen in a while.
That was fantastic, Frankie. And the reason that I'm stitching to her video is because she has declared Dune to be a white savior narrative or trope. And there are a number of people that are stitching to her video and they are coming at her, challenging her assertion because they don't believe that this is a white savior narrative. And then they'll try to identify some pieces of the story to try to bolster their argument. Like they'll say that, well, Paul was created by the Bene Gesserit, or Paul was trained to fight by the Fremen, or Paul actually likes the Fremen. And all of these are fine and well, but the problem is that these elements are not actually relevant to the argument that this is a white savior narrative. And I'm going to go through what I think about when I'm trying to identify what a white savior narrative is, because I think there is a fundamental misunderstanding of what we mean when we're talking about a white savior narrative. So I think about three elements when I'm thinking about if a story is carrying on with a white savior narrative, and there might be others, but I I can only find three. So the first element is that we're dealing with an oppressed lower class indigenous characteristics like a underserved underprivileged people. When you have a story that has a people or person with this with these characteristics, then that's one of the first elements. The second element is that they're dealing with a hardship that they cannot resolve. It's a hardship or struggle that they can't solve, resolve, they can't alleviate, they can't do it themselves. They're definitely going to need help. They're facing overwhelming odds, and they're facing an ordeal that they cannot negotiate. And the third element is that there's a member of the upper class, high born, high class, high caste, usually white coded person, or usually cast as a white person in the movie. And they basically come along and they alleviate this hardship. They alleviate it, they negotiate it, they solve it. They may do it with their help of the oppressed people or not the help of the oppressed people, but that's all in the details that don't matter. The only thing that actually matters is that the people are oppressed or they're dealing with a hardship. They cannot solve the hardship. And a person, usually white coded, comes along and basically solves a hardship. And that is the basics of what a white savior narrative is, and that's why she identified Dune as such. So none of the details, like I said, matter. So, like if we apply these elements to Dune, the oppressed people are obviously the Fremen. The hardship is obviously their struggle against the Harkonnens, and the third element is that the royal upper class person comes amongst them and helps them resolve their issues with their struggle. And that those are really all the elements that you have that you are required to identify a white savior narrative. And it doesn't just apply to Doom, it applies to other stories as well. So if you've ever seen this old show, Different Strokes, what you talking about, Willis? That's a white savior narrative. If you've ever seen Dangerous Minds with that awesome song by Coolio, that's a white savior narrative. Or if you've seen this movie recently with Sandra Bullock called The Blind Side, that's a white savior narrative. And I'm not saying I don't like these stories. I love a lot of these stories, but it is what it is. It's still a white savior narrative. So if you're ever in doubt and you don't know if what you're watching is a white savior narrative, just kind of apply these, see if these elements are present, and then you'll be able to identify whether or not the story that you are witnessing is a white savior narrative.